30 years ago, a girl vanished at summer camp, and no one believed the only witness until now. A letter, a body, a town full of secrets. What really happened at Camp High Pines? Before we dive into this chilling mystery, hit that subscribe button. This is a story you'll never forget. The envelope had no return address, just her name in slanted, careful script that didn't belong to anyone she still kept in touch with. Evelyn Walker stared at it, unmoving, her coffee cooling beside her, the buzz of her city apartment silenced by the sudden, heavy pause in her breath. She hadn't thought of Lake Arrowlight in years. Not consciously, but the name still curled in her mind like mist. Never gone, only tucked away. Hidden, like everything from that summer. She opened the letter with slow fingers, as if bracing herself for a wound she couldn't see yet. Ms. Walker, human remains were discovered in the area near Camp High Pines last week during a routine survey of old trails. I thought it only right to notify you. It may be nothing. But given your sister's case, Sheriff Nolan, Reedy, that was it. No detail, no apology. Just those words, and her sister's name burning unspoken between the lines. Lila. Evelyn sat back, heart thudding hard against her ribs. She reread it twice, 3 times, each repetition pulling her further away from the present, away from her quiet apartment, her job, her half-lived life. The room dimmed around the edges, giving way to memory. She saw the lake again, clear, still, and full of lies. The last time she saw her sister, Lila was 13, sunburned, barefoot, and laughing. Evelyn had been only 10, trailing after her like always, sticky with bug spray and mosquito bites, worshipping the way Lila made everything feel like a game. Even the long hikes and the rules and the stupid counselors who said they were too loud. But then the laughter stopped, and Lila was gone. Evelyn rose from her chair and crossed to the bookshelf where she kept a small box. She hadn't opened it in years, but she knew it was there. Inside were the scraps of a mystery no one had solved. The police report, a map of the campgrounds, a photo of her and Lila by the lake, their arms around each other, mouths frozen mid-laugh. The box was full of questions, the kind that didn't stop asking. She closed it again, slower this time. By sunset, Evelyn had packed a bag, notified her manager she'd be taking personal leave, and booked a one-way train ticket back to Arrowlight, the town she'd sworn never to return to, the town that had buried her sister in silence. As the train pulled away the next morning, Evelyn sat by the window and watched the city shrink into nothing. The further she traveled, the more the past crept in. The way her mother stopped talking about Lila 2 weeks after the funeral with no body. The way her father locked himself in the garage for days at a time. The way no one believed Evelyn when she said she heard screaming from the woods the night Lila disappeared. They said she was a child, that she didn't know what she heard, but she did. And now, 30 years later, the lake was speaking again. As dusk settled over the horizon and the train pushed north, Evelyn clutched the letter in her lap like it might dissolve if she let go. Her reflection stared back at her in the window, older, tired, and suddenly 10 years old again. The camp, the counselors, the water, the secrets. If those bones belonged to Lila, she owed it to her sister to find out the truth. And if they didn't, then someone else had been buried in silence too, and Evelyn was going to make sure the lake finally gave them back. The train pulled into Arrowlight just past noon. The station was smaller than Evelyn remembered, though that may have just been time playing its tricks. Everything looked the same, but felt different, like a place she'd once visited in a dream and returned to years later, only to find the dream had turned brittle around the edges. She stepped off the platform, clutching her small suitcase and shielding her eyes from the sharp autumn sun. The wind carried the scent of pine and something colder beneath it. Moss, maybe. Or memory. Arrowlight hadn't changed much. The main street still held the diner with the squeaky door, the gas station with its faded red pump, and the crooked post office flag that never quite caught the wind. She hailed a cab, just one was parked, and gave the address she hadn't spoken aloud in years. Her parents' house. They weren't waiting at the door when she arrived. Of course they weren't. Her mother answered after the second knock, wearing the same pale blue cardigan she used to wear during chilly camp drop-offs. Evelyn was hit with a pang of unease. Not grief, not nostalgia, just weight. Her mother's eyes, once sharp and icy, seemed dulled now. "You came," she said, not quite a greeting. "They found something," Evelyn replied. "I thought I should be here." Her mother hesitated before stepping aside. "Your father's asleep." Inside, the house smelled the same. Faint lavender, wood polish, and the subtle, persistent trace of sorrow. Evelyn set her bag by the door, unsure whether she was staying the night or not. She hadn't made that decision yet. They sat at the kitchen table, the silence familiar, but unbearable. "Do you think it's her?" her mother asked eventually. "I don't know, but I have to find out." Her mother stared at her for a long moment, her fingers tightening around a chipped mug. Then she looked away. Some things are better left buried. Evelyn didn't answer. She'd heard that line 1,000 times growing up, from relatives, teachers, even the police. But it had never sounded more hollow than it did now. Later that afternoon, she walked alone to the sheriff's office, a different building from before, newer, cleaner, but the same badge on the door. Inside, Officer Grace Bennett greeted her. She was in her late 30s, tall, with a calm, professional expression that barely concealed the tension behind her eyes. "Ms. Walker, I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances." "You have the remains?" Evelyn asked. "At the coroner's office in Fairview. We're waiting for the DNA match." She paused. "But the site where they were found, it's less than a quarter-mile from Camp High Pines, near the western shoreline." Evelyn felt a chill slide down her spine. "I want to see it." Bennett hesitated. "It's still cordoned off, but I can take you, if you're prepared for it." "I've been waiting 30 years, Evelyn said. "I can handle it." The drive to Camp High Pines was quiet. Bennett glanced at her once or twice, but didn't press for conversation. The woods grew thicker as they neared the lake, golden leaves flashing between branches like warnings. The narrow road dipped and curved, and finally opened to a gravel clearing overtaken by weeds. The camp sign was still there, half-rotted and leaning at an angle. Camp High Pines. Established 1964. The paint had peeled, but the name remained. Bennett led her down a side trail past broken benches and rotting cabins. Nature had begun to reclaim the place. Tree roots cracked through the old mess hall foundation, and ivy wound tightly around rusted swings that creaked in the wind. "This way," Bennett said softly. They reached the lake. It was as still as Evelyn remembered, mirror flat, reflecting only clouds. But its stillness was deceptive. Evelyn had once thought it beautiful. Now it looked like something that could swallow the truth and keep it. Near the water line, yellow police tape flapped between two trees. A shallow pit had been dug just past the rocks. "We found the remains here," Bennett said. Hikers noticed disturbed ground. It hadn't rained for days, just enough to loosen the soil. Evelyn stood at the edge, staring at the spot. Her sister had been just a kid. All of them had. And if these were Lila's bones, they'd been lying in the earth all this time, while life had gone on, pretending nothing happened. "There was no marker?" she asked. Bennett shook her head. "Number whoever buried the body didn't want it to be found." Evelyn looked out at the lake. "It should have been here," she whispered. "The truth. A long time ago." Bennett didn't answer. Behind them, the woods rustled softly. As they walked back to the car, Evelyn glanced at one of the old cabins. A flash of memory hit her so hard it almost made her stumble. Lila standing on the porch, yelling something, her voice sharp, panicked. A shadow behind her. The door slamming shut. But the sound faded as quickly as it had come. She rubbed her temples. Maybe it was just her imagination, or maybe it was a truth that had been trying to break through for decades. Back in the car, Bennett finally spoke. "You know, not everyone wants the past disturbed." Evelyn looked out the window. Then they shouldn't have buried it. The next morning brought fog. Thick and low, it clung to the trees like a secret, muffling the world in silence. Evelyn stood at the edge of the old campgrounds just after sunrise, wrapped in her coat, the cold air licking at her cheeks. The gates to Camp High Pines were long gone, rusted away or stolen for scrap, but the signpost remained, tilting drunkenly in the wet soil. Camp High Pines, where character is built and memories last forever. The slogan felt cruel now. Evelyn stepped onto the cracked path leading to the cabins, each one sagging into itself like collapsed lungs. Moss had overtaken the roofs. Ivy slithered up wooden posts. Nature had done its best to erase what was left, but the bones of the place still held. She passed Cabin B, the one she'd shared with Lila. The door was ajar, hanging crooked on its hinges. Evelyn hesitated, then pushed it open, the creak echoing like a groan. Inside, dust floated through slanted light. Bunk beds still stood, bare, rusted frames. The air smelled of mildew and rot. She walked to the back bunk. Heron underneath, on the wood panel. Something caught her eye. Scratched words, barely visible. "Don't trust the counselors." Her breath caught. She knelt, tracing the grooves with her fingers. Not graffiti, not a joke. A message, scrawled by someone desperate to be heard. Had Lila written it? In the mess hall she found remnants of the past. Broken dishes, an overturned table, a bulletin board with faded paper still pinned to it. She tugged one loose. It was a meal schedule from 1995. Lila's last summer. She drifted from room to room, her footsteps echoing. With every step, memories returned. Not as full scenes, but as flashes. The sound of her sister's laugh echoing across the lake, the clatter of trays during lunch, the whisper of feet running outside after lights out. The night Lila disappeared, Evelyn remembered waking up in the bunk, heart pounding, hearing someone outside. A door slamming, then nothing. She'd told the counselors. They said it was just a dream. Now, Evelyn wasn't so sure. She found her way to the dock by late morning. The lake stretched before her, still and endless. Fog lingered over the water like smoke. She sat at the end of the dock, legs crossed, the wood groaning beneath her. In her hand, she held a small photo she'd brought from the box at home. One of her and Lila, arms looped around each other, wearing camp shirts and grins. Evelyn's smile looked shy. Lila's was full of fire. She remembered how Lila had stood up for the smaller kids, how she'd argued with a counselor over a boy who was bullied during swim practice, how she'd whispered to Evelyn one night, "They think they're in charge, but they're just scared of getting caught." It didn't mean much then. It meant everything now. A twig snapped behind her. Evelyn turned sharply. A woman stood at the tree line, arms crossed, watching. She was in her early 40s, with a tired face and a gray hoodie pulled tight against the cold. She looked familiar in a way Evelyn couldn't place, until the woman stepped forward. "Evelyn Walker?" "Yes, I'm Maya. I used to be your counselor." Evelyn stood slowly. "I remember you." Maya looked down at the dock, then at the lake. "I saw your name on the report. Figured you'd come here first." "I needed to see it for myself," Evelyn said. Maya nodded, silent for a moment. "This place isn't what it used to be," she finally said. "It was never what it used to be," Evelyn replied. Maya gave a hollow laugh. "Fair enough." They stood in silence for a moment, the lake whispering beneath them, There are things you don't know, Maya said. Things that never made it into the official report. Then tell me, Evelyn said. Because I've spent 30 years trying to understand what happened to my sister. Maya looked down. It's not that simple. I don't know the full story either, but I kept something. You should see it. 10 minutes later, they stood in Maya's modest cabin on the edge of town. It smelled of peppermint tea and old wood. She retrieved a dusty plastic bin from under the couch and set it on the table. Inside were photos, journals, and several VHS tapes, each labeled in faded ink. Session A Talent Night 95 Science Fair. Cabin C. Maya picked one out. I took these during camp activities. I was in charge of video for parent night. Her voice faltered. But one of these caught something I didn't see until later. Evelyn's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Maya handed her the tape marked Session A. It shows Lila and a counselor she was arguing with. Not one of the ones they questioned. Who? Maya looked out the window, then back at Evelyn. His name was Travis, but I don't think that was his real name. Evelyn took the tape home in shaking hands. She didn't have a VHS player yet, but she would, because the past wasn't buried here. It was recorded, waiting, watching, and finally ready to be heard. The VHS player Evelyn ordered arrived the next morning, delivered by a sleepy teenager who barely looked up as he handed it off. She didn't bother with breakfast. By 9 a.m., she had the machine hooked up in her parents' basement, dusty, dim, and exactly as she remembered it from her childhood. She slid the tape labeled Session A into the player. The image flickered onto the screen, static giving way to shaky footage of children gathered in a clearing, laughing and goofing off. The timestamp read June 23rd, 1995, 2 weeks before Lila vanished. Evelyn leaned forward, heart in her throat. There she was, Lila, front and center. Grinning, trying to teach a younger camper how to do cartwheels on the grass. She looked so alive, so confident. Nothing about her seemed afraid. The camera zoomed suddenly, jolting. A tall figure entered the frame from the left, a man with short blonde hair and a forced smile. He wore a faded Camp High Pines shirt. Travis. Lila stopped what she was doing. Her body language shifted, her shoulders tense, her jaw tightening. The camera wobbled as the scene played out. She and Travis spoke. There was no sound on the tape, but their body language was unmistakable. Lila was angry. She pointed toward the woods, then back toward the younger campers. Travis shook his head, stepped closer. Too close. Evelyn's nails dug into her palm. Lila backed up, jaw clenched, then turned and walked off camera. Travis followed. The footage cut abruptly. Evelyn rewound the tape, watching it again and again. Each time, the moment grew more unsettling. Lila's expression, defiance turning to dread. Travis's body language, predatory, controlled. No one had ever mentioned Travis in the original investigation. She pressed pause and stared at the frozen image. Travis, 1 foot behind Lila, mid-step. "Who the hell were you?" she whispered. She called Officer Bennett. No answer. Left a voicemail. Then she grabbed the tape and drove straight to the sheriff's office. Bennett looked surprised to see her but motioned her into a conference room. Evelyn plugged in the player herself and hit play. They watched in silence. "That's him," Evelyn said quietly. "That's the counselor Maya mentioned, Travis, but he's not listed in any of the reports." Bennett nodded slowly, arms crossed. "He wasn't on the official staff roster. We assumed Maya remembered wrong. She didn't. Apparently not." Bennett stepped forward, peering at the paused screen. "We tried to track down every staff member, every volunteer, but there were holes, paperwork missing. The camp wasn't well organized. That's part of why it was shut down the next summer. You need to reopen this." "We already did," quietly, after the remains were found. Evelyn blinked. "Why didn't you say anything?" Bennett sighed, rubbing her temple. Because in this town, even mentioning that camp stirs up resistance. The sheriff didn't want rumors. He doesn't believe there's anything to find. Her voice dropped. But I do. Evelyn stared at her. So you believe something happened? I believe there's a chance. And that's enough. Bennett made a copy of the tape and promised to dig deeper into the counselor's identity. As Evelyn left the station, the sky had begun to darken again. Rain was coming, slow and steady, like it always seemed to in Arrowlight. She drove back to Maya's, tape still in her hands. Maya opened the door before she could knock, as if she'd been watching from the window. You saw it? She asked. Evelyn nodded. Why didn't you show this to the police back then? I didn't realize what I had. I didn't even watch most of the tapes until after the investigation ended. I thought, maybe I was wrong. You weren't. Maya swallowed. Do you think she knew something? I don't think, Evelyn said, her voice tightening. I know. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her childhood bedroom, the wallpaper faded, the air thick with quiet. Rain tapped the window like fingers. Downstairs, her parents' muffled voices moved in and out of earshot. More argument than conversation. At 2:17 a.m., Evelyn rose, unable to stay still any longer. She pulled out the Camp High Pines file from her suitcase, the one she had pieced together over years of painful effort. Articles, counselor names, police interviews, a list of campers. She scanned for Travis. Nothing. It was like he had never officially existed. She flipped to the incident report from the night Lila went missing. Buried halfway down the page, several campers reported seeing an unidentified adult near the girls' cabins around 10:30 p.m. No follow-up, no sketches, no questions. Evelyn stared at the report until the lines blurred. Travis hadn't just followed Lila that day on the field. He had been there that night, and the camp and the town had let him vanish. But Evelyn wasn't going to let him stay hidden anymore. Evelyn found Jared Whitley through a local alumni group. It took less than an hour. His profile picture showed him standing in front of a classroom whiteboard, smiling. He taught 4th grade now, in the next county over. He hadn't mentioned the camp, of course. None of them ever did. But Evelyn remembered him. Tall for his age, quiet, always scribbling in a notebook. She sent a message. Director. Honest. Jared, my name is Evelyn Walker. I believe we were at Camp High Pines together in 1995. My sister Lila disappeared that summer. I'm back in Arrowlight. Can we talk? The reply came an hour later. I've waited a long time for someone to ask me that. They met the next afternoon at a small cafe off Route 6. Jared looked older than his photo. His hair thinned and temples streaked gray, but his eyes were sharp, watchful. He stood when she approached. Evelyn, he said, I remember you, and I remember her. She nodded, not trusting her voice yet. They sat in a corner booth. Jared ordered black coffee. Evelyn didn't order anything. Her stomach was tight, her hands cold. Why did you respond? She asked finally. Jared looked down at his cup. Because I was there that night, and I've never stopped thinking about it. Evelyn leaned in. Tell me. Jared tapped his fingers against the ceramic mug. We all thought Lila was the brave one, he said. She stood up to Travis. Evelyn's pulse skipped. You knew him? Everyone knew him. But no one knew who he was. He wasn't a counselor, not officially. He wasn't in any of the meetings, but he was always around, cleaning, helping out, hanging too close to the kids. Evelyn frowned. He was allowed near the campers. It was a mess that year, Jared said. Staff was short, lots of last-minute hires. No one checked IDs. Some of the counselors were barely out of high school themselves. He took a slow breath. The night Lila disappeared. I saw her. I woke up to use the bathroom, and I saw her slipping out the back of cabin B. She looked upset, angry. She was walking fast, and Travis was following her. Did you tell anyone? Jared laughed, but it was bitter. I told my counselor. He said I must have been dreaming. Evelyn felt the weight settle deeper in her chest. Why didn't you come forward later? I was 12, Jared said, voice tight. And by the time I realized it mattered, the case was cold. No one was listening. Evelyn looked down at her hands. They never were. Later that day, she drove out to a halfway house in the next town over to meet Tasha Ellison, another former camper. Maya had given her the contact info. Tasha was 40 now, though she looked older. Her eyes were shadowed, and she wore long sleeves even in the warmth of the common room. I didn't think anyone would ever ask about that summer again, she said. Her voice was hoarse but steady. But I remember. I remember everything. Evelyn sat across from her, notebook on her lap, heart already bracing. What do you remember about Lila? Tasha exhaled through her nose. She knew something. That last week she was different, quieter, but watching everything. She kept saying she was going to tell her mom something as soon as she got home. Tell her what? I don't know, but there was a girl who left camp early. Quiet, real shy. Everyone said she got homesick and went home. Tasha paused, but I don't think she ever got picked up. I think Lila saw something, and I think Travis knew it. Do you remember his full name? Evelyn asked. Number just Travis. Tasha's voice trembled. But I remember his tattoo, on his forearm, a bird with red wings. I see it in my dreams. That night, Evelyn sat alone in her room, staring at the sketch she'd drawn of the tattoo from Tasha's description. It was crude, but clear. She cross-referenced it online. The red-winged bird wasn't just a design. It was the insignia for a now-defunct paramilitary-style youth rehabilitation group that operated in the 90s under the name Crimson Rise. There had been abuse allegations, lawsuits, a handful of arrests, most of it buried under NDAs and missing paperwork. And one of the junior staffers named in those allegations, a man with a record of false identities, alias Travis Lakewood. Real name, Daniel Trevors. Her hand shook as she wrote it down. Finally, a name. But now she needed something more. Proof. And she had a gut feeling she wasn't the only one still holding on to pieces of the truth. Tomorrow, she'd find the camp director. The sun had barely risen when Evelyn parked in front of the house on Pine Grove Lane. It looked more like a hospice than a home. The lawn had been trimmed with robotic care, but the windows were dark behind drawn curtains. The mailbox read, G. H. Grady. Gerald Howard Grady, the former director of Camp High Pines. She had found the address buried in a digitized public record from 2003, filed after Grady filed for bankruptcy when the camp shut down. He was the man who ran the summer of 1995, the man who had told her parents, without blinking, that Lila must have wandered off and drowned. He was also the man who had, according to Maya, quietly paid off several families over the years. Evelyn didn't call ahead. She didn't want to give him time to prepare a lie. A woman in scrubs answered the door. Can I help you? I'm here to see Mr. Grady. I used to be one of his campers. My name is Evelyn Walker. The woman hesitated, eyes narrowing. He's not well. Alzheimer's. He doesn't talk much. I just want a few minutes, please. After a pause, the nurse sighed and stepped back. Make it quick. Grady's room was at the end of the hall, filled with the soft hum of machines and the faint scent of antiseptic. The man lying in the bed was barely recognizable. Thin, pale, sunken-eyed. A tray of uneaten food sat beside him. His hands trembled slightly on the blanket. Evelyn sat in the chair next to the bed and waited. After a moment, his eyes opened. Cloudy. Searching. Mr. Grady, she said softly. He turned toward her, blinking. Do you remember Camp High Pines? No response. Do you remember the summer of 1995? His eyes narrowed slightly. His fingers twitched. My sister was Lila Walker, Evelyn continued. She disappeared that summer. You told us it was an accident. Still nothing. Then, very faintly, he muttered something. She leaned in. What did you say? Too loud. They always knew too much. Evelyn's stomach tightened. She didn't think he knew who she was, but some part of him remembered. Who are you protecting? She asked, her voice harder now. Who was Travis? Grady began to murmur, over and over. We had to. The nurse appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. That's enough for today. Evelyn stood slowly, but her eyes scanned the room one last time. On a dresser in the corner was a small wooden lockbox, unremarkable except for the initials GHG burned into the lid. Does he keep things in there? She asked. The nurse frowned. Old junk, camp stuff mostly. Can I see it? No, but the nurse turned her back for just a second, and that was enough. An hour later, Evelyn sat at her parents' dining room table, the lockbox open in front of her. Inside were photos, schedules, and a leather-bound director's logbook. It was yellowed with age, the ink faded, but legible. Most entries were mundane: food deliveries, attendance counts, reminders about counselor meetings. But then came the final pages, dated July 10th to 14th, 1995. Disciplinary issues with L. Walker escalating. Refusing to follow curfew, accusing staff of misconduct. Confrontation with TL witnessed by another camper. Must address before parent pickup. She knows. We need to act. Evelyn's throat tightened as she stared at the words. She reread them. Then again. They knew. They knew Lila had seen something, and they made a plan. There was no mention of what came next. Just silence. The logbook ended abruptly on July 14th. Lila disappeared the morning of July 15th. She photocopied every page and stored the originals back in the box. By nightfall, she was parked outside the sheriff's office, waiting for Bennett to return from patrol. She handed the logbook copies to the officer without speaking. Bennett read silently under the orange glow of her desk lamp. With each page, her posture straightened. This is it, she said finally. This is what we needed. Evelyn leaned forward. Then reopen the case, officially. Pull the files, track Travis, Daniel Trevors. There's enough to move forward. Bennett nodded slowly. I'll get a judge to sign off by morning. And if he's still alive? Evelyn asked. If Travis is out there, then we find him. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep much. But for the first time in nearly 3 decades, her nightmares weren't filled with silence. They were filled with names, with answers, with the beginning of the truth. The next morning, the sun was already high when Evelyn awoke, drenched in sweat and tangled in the thin sheets of her childhood bed. She hadn't meant to fall asleep at all. Her dreams had been relentless. Lila running barefoot through the woods. A red-winged bird flying overhead. A scream that never echoed back. She sat up, rubbing her temples, the memory still clinging to her like fog. But this time, there was something new. Not just a sound, a voice. Stay quiet, Evie. Don't move. The words hit her like a jolt. Downstairs, her mother was already seated at the kitchen table, dressed in slacks and a neatly ironed blouse, like she was preparing for a luncheon that didn't exist. The morning paper was folded neatly, untouched. Evelyn poured herself coffee, then sat across from her. We need to talk, she said. Her mother didn't look up. About what? About Lila. About what happened. Stillness. Just the ticking of the wall clock above the sink. It's been 30 years, her mother replied. There's nothing left to say. You got a call that night, didn't you? Now her mother looked up. Slowly. Her face blank, but her hands curled tighter around the mug. I don't know what you mean. From the camp. Someone called late. You picked up in the hallway. I saw you. Her mother said nothing. You told Dad it was just a wrong number. Still, silence. What did they say, Mom? Her mother's voice dropped to a whisper. They told me Lila had gotten in trouble, that she might try to leave camp on her own. They said not to worry, that they'd keep her close, that she just needed discipline. Evelyn's chest tightened. And you didn't tell the police. They were professionals, her mother said, her voice fraying. They made it sound like they'd handled it. I didn't want to ruin her future. She was 13. The words exploded out of her before she could stop them. Her mother recoiled, tears rising to her eyes, but not falling. We didn't know, Evelyn. We were afraid. And your father, he said it would look bad for the family. Evelyn stood, too angry to sit. You buried her while she was still alive. We thought we were doing the right thing. Number, you thought silence was easier. She stormed out of the house, the screen door banging behind her. She needed air. Distance. Something. She drove without thinking, just let the wheels turn while her thoughts spiraled. It wasn't just what her mother had done, or hadn't done. It was what she herself had forgotten. The dream that wasn't a dream. The voice. Stay quiet, Evie. Don't move. She hadn't remembered that part until now. She had been awake the night Lila left. She parked the car near the edge of the woods and walked. Leaves crunched under her boots, and wind threaded its way between the branches like breath. She followed the same trail that led to the lake, the one she and Lila had taken dozens of times that summer. She reached the clearing near Cabin B, the place where the forest opened just wide enough to show a slice of water through the trees. She stood there listening, trying to remember. Flash. A cabin door opening, light from a flashlight cutting through the trees. Lila's whisper. I have to go. Don't say anything. And Evelyn, frozen under her blanket, holding her breath. Then footsteps. Another voice, deeper, male, not angry, calm, coaxing, false. And then the sound of someone being dragged. Evelyn gasped and stumbled back, bracing herself against a tree. It hadn't been just a nightmare. She had heard it. She had known. And she had stayed quiet. Not because she wanted to, but because Lila had told her to. She sank to the forest floor, hands pressed to her mouth, trembling. Guilt rose like bile in her throat, decades old and still sharp. She had been 10, but she hadn't been blind. The silence wasn't just from others. It had started with her. That night, she sat in her car under the orange glow of a street lamp and left a voicemail for Officer Bennett. I remembered something. It's not evidence, but it's something. Lila didn't just run. She was followed. She told me not to speak, and I didn't. I'm sorry I didn't. She ended the message, her voice barely holding together. Then, through tears, she whispered the words she should have spoken 30 years ago. Lila, I'm so sorry. I hear you now. I promise I won't stay quiet anymore. The next morning was cold and bright, deceptively peaceful. Evelyn stood outside the sheriff's office, the photocopied logbook pages tucked under her arm, along with printouts of everything she'd found on Daniel Travers, aka Travis Lakewood. She felt strangely calm, not because the weight was gone, but because, for the first time in years, it had shape, a name, a face, a timeline. She stepped inside and found Officer Grace Bennett already waiting. I listened to your voicemail, Bennett said softly. You okay? Evelyn didn't lie. Number, but I'm ready. They sat together in the back office, papers spread between them like puzzle pieces. Evelyn handed over a fresh copy of the director's log, complete with Grady's chilling final entry. She knows. We need to act. Bennett read it again, her jaw tight. And the man in the tape, Travis, is really Daniel Travers? She asked. Evelyn nodded. He worked for a youth rehabilitation group in the 90s, one that shut down after child abuse charges. The bird tattoo? It was their symbol. "You ran this yourself?" "Someone had to." Bennett leaned back, exhaling slowly. "I'll file a formal motion today to reopen the case." "Officially this time?" "Yes." She paused, then added, "And I'll request a subpoena to trace Trevor's. If he used any aliases, we'll know." They didn't shake hands when Evelyn left. They didn't need to. There was still a long road ahead. But for the first time, someone in power was walking it beside her. That afternoon, Evelyn sat in the town library's records room with an old staff list from 1995 laid in front of her, and a red pen. She began crossing out names, the ones accounted for, the ones interviewed, the ones who had given statements, even if they'd said nothing useful. And there, near the bottom, she found a name she'd never paid attention to before. Leonard D. Hale, Assistant Activities Coordinator, temporary. She didn't recognize it, but something about it stuck. She opened her laptop and searched the name. Nothing. She narrowed it. Leonard D. Hale, Aerolite, 1995. And then, buried in a scanned court record from 1997, she found it. Leonard David Hale, charged with identity fraud and obstruction of justice. Known associate of Daniel Trevor's. Never convicted. A ghost name. A cover. Evelyn's heart pounded as she copied the file to her drive. Later that night, Bennett called. "I found something," she said. "Daniel Trevor's resurfaced under a different name in southern Arizona. A wildlife sanctuary. Volunteer work mostly. He moved around a lot. But we've located his last known address. The feds are being looped in." Evelyn's breath caught. "Is he alive?" "We believe so, but we'll need more than a tape and a name to bring him in." "I've got something," Evelyn said. "Another name. Leonard Hale. He was connected to Trevor's. He worked that summer." Bennett was silent for a beat. "We never interviewed anyone by that name." "Exactly." The next morning, Evelyn sat in the station as an official witness statement was recorded. She told everything. The memory of the scream, the voice telling her to stay quiet, the dream that wasn't a dream. She handed over the files on Hale and Trevor's. She gave them copies of Tasha's testimony, Jared's statement, Maya's VHS tapes. She watched as her grief was turned into evidence, into action. And at the end, when the officer asked, "Is there anything else you want to add?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "I want to know where my sister's body was for 30 years and why no one cared until now." Bennett met her in the hallway afterward. Her voice was quiet, serious. "You did good." "I didn't do it for me." "I know." Bennett handed her a manila envelope. Inside was the coroner's report. Evelyn didn't read it. Not yet. Some truths needed a slower reveal. But as she stepped out into the cool autumn air, she knew this. The silence was breaking. And someone, somewhere, was going to have to answer for it. By the end of the week, Evelyn no longer felt like she was fighting alone. The case file on Lila Walker had gone from a dusty folder in the back of a storage room to a classified priority shared between local law enforcement and a federal task force. Bennett called her every day with updates, each one more staggering than the last. "Trevor's used at least 3 identities after 1995, she said one evening. One of them under a youth mentorship program in Utah, another connected to a church camp in Louisiana. He always worked with kids, always off the books." Evelyn's stomach churned every time she heard his name. "What about Leonard Hale?" she asked. "We tracked down a man who used that alias. He was picked up in Tennessee for failing to register as a sex offender 5 years ago. His real name is Dennis Crowley. And guess what? He was also employed at Camp High Pines the summer Lila disappeared." Evelyn didn't even have to respond. Bennett's voice grew more serious. "They were part of something bigger. I'm convinced of it. This wasn't a one-time incident." 2 days later, a federal agent arrived in Aerolite to begin interviews. Evelyn wasn't part of the official briefings, but she watched from the courthouse steps as they brought Maya in for questioning. And then Jared. And then Tasha. Cleaner this time, steadier. She nodded at Evelyn from across the street, tears in her eyes but shoulders squared. "Thank you," she mouthed. Evelyn just nodded. This wasn't justice yet, but it was motion. And for families frozen in grief, motion was a kind of miracle. By Thursday, the story broke in the local paper. Missing girls case reopened after 30 years. Camp High Pines at the center of renewed investigation. The article didn't name Travers or Crowley yet. It didn't mention the suspected network, but the truth was beginning to seep into daylight after decades of living underground. At her parents' house, Evelyn laid the newspaper on the table without a word. Her father didn't look up. Her mother read every word. "You did this," she whispered, voice shaking. "No," Evelyn replied. "Lila did. I just listened this time." That night, Officer Bennett called with the news Evelyn didn't know she was waiting for. "They've issued a warrant for Daniel Travers." Evelyn sat in silence, heart thudding in her ears. "He's still in Arizona," Bennett continued, "living under the name Andrew Lark. We've already got U.S. Marshals en route. If he runs, we'll know." "He won't run," Evelyn said. "He thinks he got away with it." "Not anymore." The next morning, Evelyn returned to the lake. The woods were quieter than before. No footsteps, no bird song, just wind whispering across the water. She walked to the edge of the dock, her boots thudding softly on the aging planks. She sat at the end, same as she had the week before, but everything felt different now. Not resolved, but shifted. She took out the photo she always carried, the one of her and Lila, grinning in their camp shirts, and laid it gently on the dock. "They're going to face it now," she said aloud. "All of it." I promise she didn't expect an answer. But for a brief second, the wind pushed across the lake in a single, circular ripple, like something stirred beneath the surface. She closed her eyes. Back at her motel, a message was waiting on the room phone, Bennett's voice, low but firm. "We got him." The grave was just a marker. There had never been a body, just a stone, carved too soon, with Lila Walker etched into its surface and a pair of meaningless dates on either side. July 15th, 1995, was listed as her death, but Evelyn had never accepted it. Now she knew the truth, and it was worse than she'd imagined. She stood alone in the cemetery as late afternoon sunlight filtered through skeletal trees, casting long shadows across the manicured grass. A small bouquet of wildflowers rested in her hand, purple asters, Lila's favorite. At the base of the stone, she knelt, fingers brushing the weathered letters. "They have him," she whispered. "Travers, Crowley, and they're going to answer for what they did." Her voice cracked. "I thought knowing would feel like closure, but it doesn't. Not really, because now I know what they did to you, and I can't unknow it." The details had come slowly, like a slow-moving avalanche of grief. After his arrest, Daniel Travers, or Andrew Lark, as his license read, had refused to talk, but Dennis Crowley, weakened by years of addiction and likely bargaining for leniency, had said enough. He told investigators about the program they'd started at Camp High Pines, a twisted, unsanctioned disciplinary system, targeting children who were seen as rebellious, problematic, or too observant. Lila had fit all three categories. She'd witnessed something, a younger girl being pulled from the cabin at night, and she'd refused to stay quiet. They'd cornered her, threatened her, drugged her, and when she started seizing on the trail near the lake, they panicked. Crowley claimed they tried to bring her around, that it wasn't supposed to go that far. But the autopsy said otherwise. The coroner's report confirmed overdose by sedatives. Too high a dose for a child. Her death had not been peaceful, and her burial had been hasty, panicked. A shallow grave near the waterline, covered with leaves and silence. Evelyn closed her eyes, letting the weight of it sink in. She saw Lila's face again, that stubborn gleam in her eyes, the way she always stuck up for the underdog. Lila had been brave until the end. She had tried to protect someone, and in doing so, she'd walked right into a trap no child should have had to see, let alone suffer. Evelyn pressed the flowers against the stone. I should have said something. I should have remembered sooner. She let the tears come, silent and steady. There was no forgiveness here, only truth. As she sat in stillness, a voice broke the quiet behind her. You don't have to be alone. She turned. Tasha stood at the edge of the path, holding a small bouquet of lilies. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. I thought I'd find you here, she said. Evelyn nodded. They told you everything? Tasha knelt beside her. Enough. They sat in silence for a while, two survivors of a summer that had burned itself into their bones. I used to come here every year, Tasha said. I'd sit by the graves and apologize for being too scared, for not speaking up. I thought maybe if I suffered enough it would count for something. Evelyn glanced at her. Maybe it does, but not as much as telling the truth did. The sky began to darken. As they stood, Evelyn looked back at the grave. I'll never stop missing her, she said. You shouldn't, Tasha replied. She was worth remembering. Back at the car, Evelyn sat in the driver's seat a long time before turning the key. The engine rumbled to life, low and steady. She reached into her bag and pulled out the photo of her and Lila, now creased at the corners. She tucked it into the visor, a small act of permanence. Her phone buzzed as she pulled onto the road. It was Bennett. The message was short. Crowley is cooperating. They're preparing to charge Travers. It's happening. Evelyn didn't smile, but she exhaled. Not with relief, not with peace, but with resolve. The water might be still now, but it would never again be silent. The town tried not to look. Arrow Light had always been a place that wore politeness like armor. Weathered porches, clipped hedges, quiet grief. But after the story broke on the local news, the armor began to chip. A photograph of Lila, her camp portrait, ponytail high, eyes stubborn, flashed across the screen behind the anchor. New developments in the decades-old disappearance of Lila Walker, whose remains were recently identified. The arrest of Daniel Travers, known previously as Travis Lakewood, has led investigators to uncover a broader pattern of abuse at Camp High Pines. The words were cautious, but the implication was clear, and everyone in Arrow Light heard it. The next day, Evelyn met Maya and Tasha in a quiet conference room at the town library. Officer Bennett had arranged the space for them. It had once been used for book clubs and town meetings. Now it would serve as something else. We start by compiling names, Evelyn said, spreading out a legal pad and uncapping her pen. Not just the campers, their families, anyone who still needs answers. Maya nodded. I can contact a few former counselors, ones who left early. They might have noticed things, even if they didn't speak up at the time. Tasha was already flipping through her own notebook. I made a list last night. 7 kids I remember who never came back after that summer. Parents who just moved away. They weren't moving away, Evelyn said quietly. They were running. Over the next several days, they made calls, sent emails, reached out across forums and alumni groups. Some people hung up, some cursed, some wept. But more often than not, they responded. One mother told them she had always suspected something happened to her son, who returned from camp withdrawn and changed. Another father admitted he once confronted a counselor about bruises on his daughter's arms, only to be told she fell during a hike. Every story echoed the next, and for every voice that rose, Evelyn realized how many had stayed quiet, not out of guilt, but because the world had trained them not to speak. You're the first person who ever asked me, one woman said over the phone, so I'm finally answering. Bennett arranged for the community center auditorium to host an official gathering, a closed event for affected families and survivors. The RSVP list quickly grew. Tasha stood at the front that evening, trembling but steady, as she told her story aloud for the first time. Not to a therapist, not to a journal, but to a room of others who had lived it. Evelyn watched her with a strange ache in her chest. Admiration, grief, and fury braided together. Then came Jared, then Maya, and then Evelyn. She stepped to the front of the room, holding nothing in her hands. No paper, no speech. My sister Lila died trying to protect someone, maybe more than one person. She saw something and they tried to scare her into silence. When that didn't work, they took everything. The room was still. She was 13. She wanted to be a writer. She wanted to get her braces off before school started again. She wanted to be heard. Her voice cracked. And for a long time, I didn't speak. Because I was 10, and I thought my silence was what she wanted. But silence didn't save her, and it won't save anyone else. A few people stood and began to clap, not out of habit, but out of release. Tears fell freely. Hugs were exchanged, and Evelyn finally saw it. Grief becoming something more than pain. It was movement. It was community. It was a reckoning. That night she sat with Bennett on the courthouse steps, watching the last of the attendees filter into the parking lot. The town won't be the same after this, Evelyn said. It shouldn't be, Bennett replied. They sat in silence for a while. What happens next? Evelyn finally asked. Trevor's will be arraigned next week. Crowley's plea is almost finalized. More names are coming forward, and once we finish here... Bennett hesitated. We'll take this wider. This wasn't just Arrowlight. Evelyn looked out into the dark, the echo of Lila's voice still somewhere in the trees, in the water, in the people who would never forget her again. Before going home, she left one last message on the voicemail of a father who had lost a daughter at Camp High Pines, and had never been told how or why. You don't know me, but I know what happened to your child. And I believe you deserve to know the truth. I'm here. We all are now. The courthouse was quiet in the way all government buildings were. Stale air, neutral walls, and the kind of hush that made it feel like the building itself was listening. Evelyn sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly in her lap, as the doors opened and they led Daniel Travers into the courtroom in shackles. She recognized him instantly. His hair was gray now, thinner. His frame had shrunk, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were exactly the same as they had been on that grainy VHS tape from 1995. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. But the room looked at him. Maya, Tasha, Jared. Dozens of other survivors and family members sat in the gallery, back straight, jaws tight. A silent wall of presence that said, "We see you now." The judge read the charges. 1 count of involuntary manslaughter, 3 counts of unlawful restraint, 2 counts of endangering the welfare of a minor, and obstruction of justice. Trevor's public defender rose to speak. My client pleads not guilty to all charges. There were no gasps, just a collective tightening of the room. Evelyn didn't blink. She expected this. A man like Travers didn't admit guilt. He relied on doubt, on silence, on victims who never came forward. That world didn't exist anymore. The hearing was procedural, brief, but what mattered was what came after. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered along the steps. Cameras flashed, microphones angled forward. Evelyn stood at the top of the stairs, flanked by Maya and Tasha. A journalist called out, "Are you satisfied with the arrest?" Evelyn looked into the lens, her voice steady. Satisfied? Nothing will bring Lila back. But this is a beginning. For her, for the others, for every kid who was told to shut up or calm down or stop lying. We heard them. We believed them. And now everyone else will too. More questions came, but she didn't stay to answer them. This wasn't about headlines. It was about truth and accountability. That night, she sat on the motel bed with the coroner's report open in her lap. She finally read every word and cried. Not the wild, gasping sobs of grief, but a deep, aching release. Every line confirmed what she already knew. Her sister had been drugged. Her death had not been peaceful, but now it had a name, a timeline, a charge, and soon a verdict. A knock came at her door. It was Maya, holding 2 cups of tea. She sat beside Evelyn and handed one over. "He looked old today," Maya said. "He is old." "You think he feels guilty?" "I don't think people like him feel anything." They sipped in silence. Then Maya said something Evelyn hadn't expected. "When this trial is over, I want to rebuild the camp." Evelyn turned sharply. "What?" "Not that camp, not the cabins, but the idea. A place for kids who've been through hell. Somewhere safe, real, honest." She looked at Evelyn. "Would you help me?" Evelyn didn't speak for a long time. Then she nodded. "Lila would have liked that." Later that night, she wrote a letter. Not to Travers, not to the judge, to Lila. She wrote it slowly, deliberately. "You weren't a ghost. You were a girl who mattered. You were brave. You told the truth. And I'll spend the rest of my life making sure no one forgets that again. You didn't get justice in time, but you got it now. And I promise, your story isn't buried anymore." She folded the letter, placed it in the envelope, and tucked it inside the photo frame by her bedside. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees, and the lake, somewhere far beyond the town, was quiet. But it no longer held secrets, only echoes. 3 years later, the forest had changed. Not entirely, but enough. Evelyn stood at the new entrance gate, where a fresh wooden sign had been carved and painted by hand. The lettering was warm, inviting, and simple. Camp Lila, a place for voice and light. Below it, in smaller print, in memory of those who were silenced, in honor of those who spoke. Children's voices echoed faintly from deeper inside. Shouts, laughter, the thud of soccer balls against the grass. No one was crying. No one was afraid. It was exactly the opposite of what this place had once been. Evelyn smiled. Maya found her near the new arts building, clipboard in hand, her gray hair tied back in a low bun. She looked tired, but peaceful. There was a light in her that hadn't been there before. "You made it," she said, pulling Evelyn into a hug. "Wouldn't miss it." They walked together through the grounds. The cabins were new, brighter, safer. The lake shimmered in the distance, no longer heavy with memory, but open, reflective, pure. "First group of campers finished their session last week," Maya said. "All trauma survivors. We had therapists on site, group sessions, creative outlets. Some of them spoke for the first time in months." "And they felt safe?" Evelyn asked. "They did." A pause. "We're changing something, Evelyn." She nodded. Lila would have wanted that. Later that evening, after the sun had dropped behind the trees and the air cooled with early dusk, Evelyn made her way alone to the edge of the water. She sat at the dock. The new one. Built stronger. This one didn't creak or sway. It stood firm. She pulled the letter from her jacket pocket, the one she'd written to Lila, sealed but never buried. She placed it on the water and let it go. The wind caught the envelope gently, sending it gliding across the surface like a paper boat. It floated toward the center, turning once, then disappearing into the fading light. Not lost, given. Behind her, a child's laugh rang out. Then another. Evelyn smiled without sadness. She rose, dusted off her hands, and turned back toward the cabins, toward the sound of life. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't searching. She was home. And for the first time since that summer, the lake didn't whisper lies. It whispered peace. In the years that followed, Camp Lila became a national model, a place where silence was not expected, but broken, where pain didn't mean weakness and survival was honored, not buried. Lila Walker's name appeared in textbooks, in interviews, in memorial scholarships. Her story became not just a warning, but a legacy. And Evelyn? She stayed, taught art, told the truth, and made sure that when the next little girl came forward, someone would look her in the eye and say, "I believe you." The truth is no longer buried, but there's more beneath the surface. Subscribe for more haunting stories, deep dives, and the voices that won't stay silent.